Welcome to another broadcast of mindyourhealthcast.com, your weekly informative, nutritional, healthy living, anti-aging, longevity, whatever else you would like broadcast. We still are open on our forum for comments, questions, and criticism. We're open for criticism. You're inclined to disagree anytime you like, and you're entitled to your disagreement, however bad it is. And of course, even though it's wrong, I'll be willing to listen to it. I'm being funny. But we do seriously welcome your comments on the forum. It's there for your benefit, and I have all kinds of subjects to talk about, but sometimes there's going to be people who would like to hear a particular thing or maybe a particular slant on a particular thing. So we're going to be doing that. We're also getting ready to start doing some interviews. We talked about that in the beginning, but we didn't do them yet. So now we want to get going on lining up some people. One of the books I'm going to mention today, the doctor has said that he would be happy and willing to be interviewed, and he has uncovered some very interesting information that we're going to be talking about. Now, we do want you to always remember to go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and you can link directly from there to the broadcast, or you can go directly to the broadcast by going to freedomcast.com/mindyourhealthcast, and it will take you right to our program. Remember, it goes up at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and it will be there through Thursday night, actually 24 hours a day. So there is no reason not to see it unless you don't want to, and that's perfectly all right too. So today, we're going to talk about diets. Diets. Now, everywhere you turn, every few months, there's a new diet comes on the market, and the public, like a herd of sheep, all kind of swerve off to that diet for a while, and that's the latest, greatest. And then sometime later, another one comes on the market, and then they swing off after that diet, and that's the greatest. And some of them, like one that came out many years ago called the Cambridge diet, eventually was pulled from the market because people were developing terrible problems of gallstones and some very serious liver problems. So basically, anytime a new one comes out, and especially if it's either really lopsided or it involves taking some type of product, probably a good idea to learn a lot more about it before you jump into the middle of it. There are so many, I know it's confusing. I have been in the field probably very close to 40 years, and doing nutrition is what I started with. And as I've watched over the years, all of these programs have come out. You name it, I've seen probably every extreme program there is, and I've seen every combination of program there is, and hopefully I've seen everyone out there. There's probably a few, I suppose, that I did miss because they're pumping them out now around the world, not just in the U.S., but around the world. So there is a lot of confusion. I'm going to deal with some issues today that I think make sense to me, because these things that I'm going to be talking about are based on a lot of studies by some very what I call qualified as well as very authentic people, meaning they really wanted to know what's best. They weren't trying to sell something just to make some money, but they very seriously wanted to know, what are we supposed to eat? And I'm sure they, like me, have been perplexed. What is the best diet? And I remember what I was taught way back along the way, that when you have a patient come in, the first thing you should do is get them on a body cleansing program, and you should get them on a vegetarian diet. That was some of the early ideas about how you should handle the world today in terms of all the things we're dealing with, was to get to be a vegetarian. Get rid of all the meat, get rid of all these things out of your diet, and that will make you healthy. Now, the interesting thing I found out was that many of the people I put on a vegetarian diet seemed to do pretty well, and then other people seemed to do terrible. And I thought, well, that's strange, because when I tried being vegetarian, it worked fine for me, so I'm assuming it must be good for everyone. However, that ended up not being the case. I had 2 children, decided to go on diets. One went on vegetarian and did extremely well. It was my son, and he felt good, had lots of energy, and everything was great. My daughter said, I'm going to go on that program too, and after a period of time she was getting tired, weak, sickly, she looked pale, and that's when I realized she's not going to be able to do that. And when she started eating some meat, within a day or 2, her color came back, her energy went up, and she started feeling much better. So I had a suspicion, maybe this vegetarian diet isn't necessarily good for everyone. So consequently, I started to do some digging. And over the years, I've looked into all kinds of programs. And the one that caught my attention, we're going to be talking about some today, was that I realized that different people had different requirements. And pretty much every diet that comes out assumes that everyone is the same. So I think a good example of that is that several years ago there was a book came out actually by a husband and wife team called the Diamonds. The book was called Fit for Life. And a lot of people jumped onto that and started following it, and it was a vegetarian diet. And so a lot of people felt good at the beginning, but then as time went on, they began to feel pretty lousy. Then other people, as they continued on, they continued to do great. And that was actually my second big reinforcement about what was wrong, that there had to be something more individualized. And so I remember back along the way finding out about a doctor out of Maryland. I found out he had been doing a lot of research on blood types and diet. And I found out that they had some other things they were doing too, but bottom line was it was going to be an individualized diet, and that caught my attention. He had a training program that you could go to, and they would teach the principles of what they had uncovered. Now, let me tell you that this is not the same blood type diet that's become popular in recent years. His work goes way, way back. Dr. Powers was his name. He was a medical anthropologist. That's one of his backgrounds. And he traveled around the world at one time studying the origin of blood types and the dietary material that was available to eat for each of those blood types. When he had continued this, he came back to the U.S. and he got together with a group of doctors in Maryland and opened this large clinic to study the effects of different foods with different blood types. Now, he had a rough idea of what he was looking for based on the food that was available in the different areas of the world where the blood types came from. And so they started doing actual blood tests with each person and measuring their blood reactions to the food. Interestingly, at some point, they gathered enough information to publish a list for each of the 4 major blood types, which is, of course, the ABO system, which meant there are A's, B's, O's, and ABs. And those are the 4 major blood types of the ABO typing system. Now, there are other blood type systems. We're not even going to get into those today, and there are some variations of the A type, maybe more so than the others. Also, there's the RH factor, and that was also included. The RH factor has 3 different types of RH factors in the blood, C, D, and E. The one that is usually measured, which is the most reactive, is the D. So basically when you hear somebody say they're RH negative, that really means they're RHD negative. as opposed to the C or E. They use this in hospitals for doing blood transfusions to know that if you have the wrong of those two, you could get a reaction. And the same as the blood types. Now, I'm not going to go into all the intricacies of the blood types at this point, other than to say the work that Dr. Powers did was based on the three different A, B, and O combinations that people end up having. Now, once I went to his program, I became more convinced because I, having been a type A blood, had ended up measuring, or being aware of, I should say, various foods that bothered me. I mean, some were very significant. And I had a list of the foods I knew I could not eat. I also had noticed with some A people that there were some types of food that are the O's, that I knew that the O people didn't do well with. And so when I took his program, it was interesting because right down the line of the foods to avoid for type A were every one of those that I had picked out for myself that I could not tolerate. And the same with the O's. The things I had noticed were problems for type O people were on his list of no-nos for type O's. And so since that time, I've used the system that he had developed, and I've looked at some of the others. As I say, there's a more popular version out now on the market by a doctor, I can say his name because his book is all over, Dr. Peter D'Adamo, and it's called Eat Right for Your Type. Now, I'm not against the book. I think that there's a lot of good information why blood types are important. And I'm not against what he does, but when I looked at his list of foods for type A blood, he had things on there that I knew I could not eat, and when I looked at the O's, the same way. Now, I have to say that I've heard recently that he's done some tuning of his program, and so I haven't seen the latest, so I can't really comment on that. But his original book, Eat Right for Your Type, there are a lot of foods on there for the various blood types that they cannot eat very well, that he said were good or okay, and there's some that he said to avoid that can be good for that blood type. So there are new books coming out by the Powers. There's two of them that are slated to come out. They haven't been released, and of course Dr. Powers has been very cautious because he really wanted to be sure that he had enough information before he put it in a book form. He didn't want people to get misled, and so he's been very diligent in researching thoroughly all the things that are involved so that when he does put the book out, it's accurate. And it was slated to come out about 2 years ago, but it was held back, and my suspicion is that new information was found, and so they didn't want to put it out yet. So you actually see the book under his wife's name, Laura Powers. They were both involved in the program that I took. And I'm not so sure but whether she's gone kind of off on her own direction and he's gone his, but at any rate, they work together and are very meticulous researchers in terms of what is the proper diet for each person. Now, I'm saying all this to say that this whole idea of something being individual for each person, or at least certain groups of people, runs contrary to the general way things are done today. And I don't care whether it's in medicine or whether it's in natural medicine or nutrition or whatever. It seems that when a person finds something that works good for himself or herself, they then have the idea that it's good for everybody. And so immediately they put a book out, and immediately they start doing workshops, and immediately they start doing certification programs, and pretty soon we have a whole group of people following a particular program. Now, it's interesting because you might say, well, if it isn't accurate, then why do a lot of people do well on it? Well, most of it is kind of dumb luck, and I have to say that in the blood typing system, the ABO system, there are about 43% of the people in the U.S. who are typed are O's. About 41% of the people who typed are A's. So that means about 82 to 84% of the people in this country are A's or O's. And there's about 40% plus of each of those. Now that means that any diet you come out with is good for A's, 40% of the people plus are going to do well in it. And anyone that comes out for O's, 40% or so are going to do well in it. Now, that's enough people to make the person who started the diet think that this is a great diet for everyone. Because, you know, in the field of regular medicine, only about probably 35 to 40% effectiveness has been found to be the case with any new drug coming out on the market. Even though they're targeting a particular set of symptoms, by the time it gets on the market and people start taking it, on the average, plus or minus 40% of the people, and this has been admitted to by some people who were speaking for the pharmaceutical industry, about 40% of the people, plus or minus, are going to actually get the effect that the drug was put on the market for. But see, the problem is, with all research, is that people are not the same. And that's where the real big problem comes with diets, is that everyone's not the same. And so it's not just blood type. That's one of the factors. But there's even more to it than that. And so what we want to do is we want to step back just a little bit and look at some of the beginning research that has really laid the foundation for individuality. And that was the work of a biochemist by the name of Roger J. Williams to be exact, who way back in 1956 published the first big book called Biochemical Individuality. This book is called The Key to Understanding What Shapes Your Health, the Basis for the Geneotrophic Concept. Basically what he found out way back in the 50s, actually it was before that because it wasn't until 56 he published his first book. But for years he researched how people are different, not only chemically but physically. In other words, we're a human being and we have stomachs and we have livers and we have lungs and so forth. However, when you look at it, those stomachs, for example, there's a page in here that has about 18 or 19 different stomach shapes that they have found in doing dissections of corpses, that all these different stomach shapes occur. Some are short and very thick, some are very long and thin, some hold a lot of food, some hold much less food. So that's just one issue. If you look at livers, if you start looking at kidneys and lungs and so forth, he found that there's so many differences, which got him into the idea that, well, you know, genetically we come from a mix of the father and mother's background, and so we're going to have differences. We're generally human beings, and we generally have a certain set of organs and so forth, but there's a lot of uniqueness within each of those individuals that draw from the gene pool that they came from, and therefore it's important to understand that. So the next thing in all of his research was, he found out that even though I may only require 35 or 50 milligrams of vitamin B1 a day, or maybe even less, another person may need 75 to 100 or maybe 150 milligrams because of peculiarities of that person. And that's what he means about the geneotrophic idea, that we have to take into consideration where we came from as an individual and our family background and our ancestral background. So this book, excuse me, this book has been recently reprinted, and this is the one I have right handy here. This was also a foreword put in it by Dr. Jeffrey Bland, PhD, who is probably one of the most renowned living biochemists at the moment. Roger J. Williams is no longer with us, but for years he put out a tremendous amount of research material, some which led to this book, and he continued on after the book. And he wrote a lot of scientific articles and so forth, so it's not that that book was all he did. He was the discoverer, if I recall, of vitamin B5, pantothenic acid. He basically got heavily into what is the best as far as amino acids, as far as vitamins and minerals, and so forth for each person, and ultimately worked on fine-tuning a program for each person. So what I'm saying is that we need to lay the groundwork that it's very important that we find out a lot more about a person and that we do something that's very unique for them. Now, sometimes there's going to be temporary diets for a person just because at the beginning we need to clean up the body, and from that we then need to see where the person needs a particular group of vitamins more than others. But we can't know that till we kind of give a basic set of nutrition for that person unless we know a lot more about their family. They can make a big difference as far as what's going on in their family background, but that's only part of the story. He also realized that the environment that you grow up in plays a big factor. So we have to know that too, and that becomes very important. In fact, it's even more so than that because there's a very interesting book put out by a Dr. Larry McCleary, who basically is a pediatric neurosurgeon. But along the way, as he's doing all these brain surgeries, especially with children, he decided that it probably would be very beneficial to do some research and find out what nutrients are best for the brain nervous system and help in recovery. As a result of that, he learned more than what he was looking for on a positive side. And so he has just recently released a book called Feed Your Brain and Lose Your Belly. Now, the interesting thing about it was not a diet intended to lose weight, but what he found is when he corrected the brain, the person actually, a lot of other things corrected in the body, and the people that had excess weight began to lose weight on it. So he's put this new book out. I met him recently and talked with him, and he has agreed that at one point he's going to be one of the people that we talk about. So we'll be talking more about his book, but there's a particular part that I want to use today, which is why I brought this up. When we're talking about the individuality, he has a whole section on research in this book about what happens to the child intrauterine. In other words, the prenatal condition of a person, if they're deprived of certain nutrients and so forth, what does that do to the development of the child, and then in turn, what does that do to the biochemical needs of that child? And so there's been quite a bit of research on that. So I know there's a whole group on the psychological side also, and of course that's the other big factor is the psychological side. But he's talking in this one about the nutritional, what it can do to each of the developmental stages, because each stage of development requires a certain set of nutrients to be available. And if a child is being born to a mother who is not taking care of herself, or who only eats one food, or eats a lot of garbage food, or does a lot of things, a lot of those nutrients can be missing, and so in the development of the child there's going to be some effects in terms of the needs and chemistry of that particular person. So you'll probably find this to be a very interesting book, and it's going to be on our list of books on the website. We work on keeping up with new books of all the things that you need to know. And so they're available, and on the website, when you click on the book on our shopping cart, it takes you to Amazon, and you can purchase the books. And pretty much, as far as I know, all the books that we bring up are available. For example, the Biochemical Individuality by Roger Williams, and the one by Feed Your Brain and Use Your Belly. And as I say, the doctor's name is Dr. Larry McCleary. Now I'm doing that because I also had said we were going to do some book reports, and this is extremely good. This book gets into how leptin receptors in the brain improve, and therefore your body gets the message, I have enough weight, I don't need to put on any more, and starts to burn off fat. So this is good information. Now I don't believe that Dr. McCleary is heavy yet into the quality of food, although I'm sure he would say eat good quality food, but what represents good quality food, what might be different to certain people. So I'm building a case that is very important on what happens to a person even before they get into this life. Now there's a couple more books I want to mention at this point. One is called Origins, and the subtitle is How the 9 Months Before Birth Shape the Rest of Our Lives. Very good book to read, and especially if anyone hasn't had children and is planning on having children or having any more children. There's a lot of very good information on that in this book. The author is Annie Murphy Paul. So that's a good one to look into. The other one is called Nurturing Your Unborn Child, a 9-month program for soothing, stimulating, and communicating with your baby, because as I mentioned, the emotional side is just as important. The main author of this is Thomas Verney, MD, co-author of The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, along with another lady, Pamela Weintraub, who has co-authored the book. That again is going to be on our website, but that's important to lay out the basics to begin with. And the more that we start thinking that just because it helps someone else, it's not necessarily going to help us. Now what I have found is that pretty much when somebody writes a diet book, and when I say diet, and I guess I should clarify that, today almost exclusively when some people says I'm going on a diet, we think they're going to lose weight. Whereas diet just has to do with what you eat, and it's not necessarily just for a particular purpose. Now if we say a weight loss diet, then that's different than saying I'm going on a diet. So there's all kinds of these diets out here, and some do cause you to lose weight, but they, to me, would be a temporary diet, not a permanent diet. So basically what I'm looking for is, okay, what is it that you should eat for the rest of your life to be a healthy person? And we're talking something entirely different. If you do not deal with the individuality of the person, you end up with a big problem. Now, I will throw in at this point that the government has gotten into the game, and back for a period of time now, they published these dietary guidelines for Americans. Now, recently I just printed out this nice-looking 68-page report called Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2010. Now, I have to commend them that they would even bother to do anything with nutrition in light of the way everybody has gone with drugs and think that everything to do with health requires some kind of drug. So in that respect, it's a good venture. And if you just look at it with your rose-colored glasses, of course, then that looks very good. And it's pretty. I mean, they've done a good job with the cover on it. However, when you get through with it, you kind of come out with the idea that they're saying you should eat food and several different kinds. But as far as going into it in depth to the point you should, and to the quality of food, and all kinds of things that you really need to know if you're going to be healthy, I would have to give this a useless rubbish package if you wanted to waste 68 pages of paper to print it out plus the ink. Now if you're curious about it, you can just go online and bring it up and look at it, and they have them back I think 1980s and 1990s that they've come out with these guidelines. But what you probably find that is pretty much the party line, that they don't get into any depth. Now they are saying that diet could help you prevent cardiovascular problems, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, and all that. But the information as far as, okay, what is a healthy diet, and especially what's a healthy diet for me, and what is good food, and what about the quality of the food, and basically they don't deal with that to any great degree. They give you what should be in certain things, but I know that the Department of Agriculture had been doing studies periodically, and that back in the 30s, it was already found that the food was missing all kinds of nutrients because the soil was depleted. In fact, there was a report which I have, which was read before the U.S. Congress back in the 30s, talking about miracle doctors. And what these miracle doctors were in the 30s were doctors who were having people take supplemental vitamins and minerals because the soil was missing them. Now, if they were low back then, imagine what they are now. Now, I do know that in the 60s, they did a major study of the nutritional constituency of various commercially grown vegetables and fruits and so forth. And they found that in the 60s, they were lower than they were in the 30s. And the 30s were already low. Now, a few years ago now, they've started measuring again. And from what I've been able to get into and read, although it's not easy to find the information, it appears that the newer readings now, they're finding on the average that the nutrients today are 50% less than they were in the 60s when they did the studies. And of course we know the 60s were also lower than the 30s, which were already too low. Now, I have to agree with one of my books put out by a psychologist just recently on the mind and health and so forth, and she's a psychologist, but she commented that there's no way we can live today in light of the way things are without taking supplements because the food is too destroyed, basically. Not just the way it's growing, but the soil has been depleted. And we have found out some very important things about nutrition, that these are must-dos. If you don't do these first, you don't even know what all the person needs in terms of health. And whether they come to my clinic to be treated, that's one of the first things I have to address now, because we did a series of studies on people's body and found out that they were deficient, and everybody that we ran. One doctor I know ran a study for 3,000 people, and only one person in 3,000 had a decent level, and of course that was iodine. And all of the ones I ran, they were off, except for anywhere from low to extremely low. It's not in the soil, and it's not in the food, and the 150 micrograms that you might get from iodized salt, if you take enough of it, which is really not salt, but a chemical called sodium chloride. I have to throw that in. We've got a big problem. So anyhow, that has to be taken care of. Because even all the things I'm telling you now, if you're not watching out for that, you're in big trouble. Okay, so let's go a bit further then. We know that we're born with a different genetic, and we're born from a family with a different background. We are conceived in the first 9 months of our life intrauterine, and at that point we are subject to the diet and whims of the mother carrying the child. And then after birth, depending on how the child is treated, what it's fed, what kind of stresses it's under, is going to alter, because people under extremely high stress are going to require more B vitamins and people are not. So how can you set a standard for everyone when this person is under extreme stress and is using up the B vitamins and the magnesium and copper and iron and other things very rapidly? Then how are you going to say, okay, here's what you need to take? You can't really fix that. It's not that simple. Now, we need to then kind of look at this blood type thing. Now remember I said that's one of the factors, and it is a genetic factor, and it fits in with what Dr. Roger Williams wrote about, except that no one had done all the heavy studies, and for some reason he did not get into blood types as a factor. The blood type factor that I am the most familiar with in terms of I feel that it works, because it fit with all my clinical evidence, is the one that is put out by Dr. Richard and Laura Powers. As I say, unfortunately, unless you go to a doctor who was trained by them, there has not been books out. I've seen the copy of the cover of the 2 new ones that are coming out. But, you know, their system was not just looking at the blood type, but they also got into something called body types. And the body types are related to either overactive or recessive glands in the body. And when I say glands, we're talking about hormone-producing glands. For example, if someone is born with a certain type of blood, and then they have a pancreas gland dominant, and incidentally, pancreas is not an organ, the pancreas is a gland. In fact, it's a super big gland. It actually is an endocrine as well as an exocrine gland. Now, endocrine gland means a gland that releases the hormones directly into the blood. An exocrine gland is one that releases it out into the body other than the blood. So with the pancreas, it's producing hormones that go into the blood, such as insulin and glucagon. And it also releases the hormones and enzymes and so forth that go into the gastric tract. And that's emptied directly into the gastric tract. So we have both an exocrine and endocrine gland, which is a big gland. Now, many people refer to the pancreas as an organ, which it is not. At any rate, that person will always have a strong desire towards food if that is overactive, and they will always be fighting weight from the time they're small. So that's what I mean by glandular typing. And so the Powers have done some research, and they came up with 8 what they call biotypes, which is a combination of blood type and dominant and recessive organs and glands. From that, they can tailor a diet that is more specific to the person. And so basically that's what I was trained in. The new books that are coming out are going to talk about that. But until those are available, unfortunately, you cannot get them, other than you can try to look them up on the internet and find out some about it, but you're not going to get all the detailed information that you need based on that. Now, the fact is that within our bodies, we then are influenced by the genes, we're influenced by the prenatal things, we're influenced by birth and our diet afterwards, meaning the environment we're born into. We're influenced by the amount of stress that we have on us. But then there's another factor that's referred to as epigenetics. The lecture we did, or the broadcast on homeopathic medicine, we talked about Dr. Hahnemann and alluded to something called miasms, which are inherited taints. Well, now there is a whole new realm of research come up called epigenetics, which means inherited information that is not in the genes. But this inherited information can determine how the genes get expressed. So that means good genes get expressed. If you have a good positive epigenetic information, or it can go the other way, is that the bad genes can get expressed if we've got some of the bad epigenetic information. So there is a book out on that, written by a researcher, a PhD researcher by the name of Dawson Church, just like it sounds, the word church, and it's called The Genie and the Genes. And I would get it in the revised edition, which it's already been added to because this is ongoing research. But it's very similar to the miasms, because Dr. Hahnemann, clear back in the early 1800s, talked about the idea that we seem to inherit a taint or a disturbance that makes us prone to develop certain kinds of problems. Now, getting back then to the nutrient idea, then if you get that from a family, let's say you came from a family that's extremely high stress. Well, one of the things that's going to happen, if you remember from my cholesterol broadcast, is you can have high cholesterol. And that's going to come in genetically, but the stress-related factor that can come through from that family too, and therefore that means they are always going to need more B vitamins and certain minerals like magnesium and so forth that are tied to the nervous system, and therefore that epigenetic that you have is going to make it mean that you're going to need more of that. So what I'm saying is that even though you know the blood type, and even though you know the body type, which is related to dominant and recessive glands, and that gets the body biotypes of the powers goes back and joins very well with the work of Roger Williams on the biochemical individuality. All of that has to come together, and if you add the miasmic or the epigenetic things, that means you could come in having high cholesterol because your family history had to cope with high stress, and you emotionally are going to be affected by that. And as I say, homeopathic medicine, as far as I know, is the only medical system that specifically deals with that side of our health, and that is under the term of miasms. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit more about some of the diets that are out there and some of my comments on them. I'm not trying to be a critic of everything. I'm trying to look at it realistically. And generally, you're going to find that there's two big classes of diets. One that emphasizes being a vegetarian, get rid of all meat, get rid of all this, and get rid of all that, and eat only vegetables, primarily, and some fruits, and some grains. Now, that's going to be toward the pure vegetarian diet. No eggs, no milk, none of that stuff. That's pure vegetarian. Then we have the variations of that that says, well, it's okay to have some eggs and it's okay to have some dairy. But again, that's just a generalized opinion. There's no real in my mind, there's no scientific basis for somebody to say that. But anyhow, you'll find that there's a lot of diets that lean toward that direction of being some form of vegetarian. Anywhere from a total vegetarian, or like a friend of mine that was a naturopath and unfortunately now is dead. He went to an extreme and said that you only eat what's in season, period. So if watermelon is big in season, you only eat watermelon. If grapes are in season, then you only eat grapes. And you should only eat it from the locality you live in. Unfortunately, he developed cancer and he died. Now, there's a lesson in that. The lesson is that the next diet that we want to talk a little bit about is what this does to you. First of all, if you eat only vegetables and only fruits, you're going to push the body way out of balance. We have a digestive system that is designed to take a wide range of the basic nutrients like protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Now, there can be variations, of course, within each individual of those amounts, but we have a digestive system that is set up to handle all those at any given meal. Now, I know there's another dietary idea that's out there, and I haven't found it to be valid. I can't find any real reason why it should be, and that is they're saying that you can't mix certain foods together because this is more protein and this is more carbohydrate, etc. Well, I looked at that, as I say, in almost 40 years, you pretty well see about everything that's out there. And I looked at that, but then I'm thinking, okay, when you take food in your mouth, I don't care what it is, a vegetable, for example, let's say any kind of vegetable. Okay, what's that vegetable made up of? It's made up of carbohydrates, fats, protein, and minerals and vitamins. That's what it's made up of. Okay? When you put that into your body, your digestive system has to be capable of dealing with that whole group of things. And it is. When it hits your mouth, if there's any carbohydrate to any degree, meaning a complex carbohydrate, a starch, immediately an enzyme is released in your saliva, and the pH of the saliva shifts from 6.5 to 6.4 all the way up to 7, 8, 9, because the enzyme that's released in the mouth to do the first stage of complex carbohydrate breakdown requires an alkaline environment because the enzyme is sensitive to pH as well as to temperature and water. So the first stage of carbohydrate takes place in your mouth. Now, it doesn't make any difference if there's protein in there, and it doesn't make any difference if there's fats in there. That carbohydrate starts to break down in your mouth. Now, when all of this moves into your stomach, guess what happens in the stomach? The stomach shuts, and hydrochloric acid is released in your stomach, and an enzyme that begins the first stage of protein breakdown. That enzyme breaks apart, it's called pepsin, and it breaks apart large complex protein molecules. That's all it does. It does not affect the carbohydrates in any way, and it does not affect the fats in any way. Its only job is to break down large protein molecules into peptides, which are shorter chains. Then, as the food moves out of the stomach into the small intestine, you then have a release of bicarbonate into the small intestine to start alkalizing it a little bit more, because the enzymes that now are released in the small intestine are going to finish the job of the food you've eaten. So you had the first stage of carbohydrate in your mouth, the first stage of protein in your stomach, and now the small intestine has to finish the whole job. So there's amylases, proteases, lipases, all released from the pancreas into the small intestine. And so the lipases are going to break down the fats. But guess what? Something else has to happen, and that is that a signal had to go to the brain and back to the gallbladder to release the bile into the small intestine to mix with the fats to emulsify it so the lipase can break down the fats. Okay, so now we are going to do the only stage of fat digestion that the body has. Emulsify the fat and break it down with lipase, and that takes place in the small intestine. We have also amylase, which breaks down the rest of the carbohydrates into simple sugars. That takes place in the small intestine. We also then have the release of the proteases, which finish breaking down the peptide chains into individual amino acids. Okay, now, if that's the normal process of digestion, why would we need to separate carbohydrates from proteins or whatever? If our digestive system is working, as the food moves through, all three of those are addressed and completed. So I never could, based on biochemistry, I never could find, and physiology, I could never find a reason why you needed to separate those when they all grow together in nature and the food you eat has them all present. Now, even though we say potato is carbohydrate, high in carbohydrate, doesn't mean it doesn't have protein and fats and vitamins and minerals, because it does. At least if it's growing in soil that had some of that stuff. So it doesn't make any difference in my mind. So I never could see a rationale. Now, your digestion, if your body's been weak and sick, probably doesn't work well, period. So then you may have to supplement with hydrochloric acid and enzymes until your body can get on its feet. So that's a totally different picture. So I hope you're kind of getting a drift of what I'm saying, that you need to understand, number one, how the body and the biochemistry works, and then number two, you have to eat good food. And you have to know something about your predisposition, which in the blood types has to do with certain things you do well with and don't. Okay, now in the blood type, just as a general rule, the A's are vegetarian and can be. They don't have to be, but they can be a total vegetarian, but they certainly don't want to eat red meat and big steaks and so forth, because the digestive system is not geared to handle that. You can eat a little fish, and sometimes it's referred to as a pescan vegan diet. You can have some vegetables, a lot of fruits, vegetables, and some fish. I have found that a little bit of white meat turkey from a good source of turkey, or a little white meat chicken, you could handle that, but type A blood does not need a lot of protein. They do not need large amounts of protein. And so all of the heavy meats like steaks, pork, game meat, all of those is not very good for A's. It's going to stress your system and it's going to create problems over time. Now, the other thing I need to say is that with diet changes, if they're going to be adverse to you, you may not know till years down the road, because pretty much the chronic diseases start in your body 20 to 30 years before you ever know it. And you can get away with pouring all kinds of garbage in your body for a long time and think, doesn't bother me, until all of a sudden one day you've got stomach cancer, you've got colon cancer, you have leaky underarms, or whatever, that's going to mean that your body has had too much of something and you're in big trouble. Now, the other one that I have to throw into this is the idea of pH, because I'm looking at some of these diets. And as I say, most of them are either going to be high protein, low carbohydrate, low protein, or totally vegetarian. Now, has been and is some weight loss programs. And so, see, that's a special diet, is a weight loss diet. But diet just refers to everything that you do with your food. Okay, some of these weight loss programs out there are high in carbohydrate and low in protein. Some of the others are high in protein and low in carbohydrates. Now, guess what? That matches real well. If it's high carbohydrate, low protein, that's a good diet for an A person. But on the other hand, high protein and low carbohydrate is good for an O person because they need much more protein. And they need that red meat, and they need all this heavy stuff. So my point is, you can't go out on an extreme for anything. You have to understand what's going on and know the full picture. Now, the one, however, that bugs me a lot, you always have to have something that kind of bugs you. And there is a program out called the pH Miracle. And that, along with some other books I have in my library, one says alkalize or die. There's a water unit that's being pushed on the market for about $4,000 that wants you to go buy it and drink all this 9 to 9.5 alkaline water, and that's going to cure all your problems. And then there's another program out that says eat all alkalizing things. And there's a special diet, which we haven't even gotten into and won't have time, called the Hallelujah Diet, that was put out. It's basically a very strict vegetarian diet because a minister had cancer and he felt he was directed to go a certain way, and it helped him, and he got over his cancer, so he feels everybody should eat that diet. Unfortunately, that doesn't work well because type O blood, if they don't get enough good protein, and I mean meat protein, over time they're going to get sick and weaken, and they're not going to do well. So anyhow, this pH Miracle diet is another one of those that works for a while, but part of the problem is if you push your body too alkaline, guess what? You're going to shut down certain functions in the body, like cellular detox and things like immune function and so forth. And so you're not going to have any adverse feelings. I think one of the worst things that happened was people began to think that symptoms are the disease. Every time you have a set of symptoms by medicine grouped together and given a name, it's called a disease. But that's not so. What the symptoms are is your body's immune system trying to take care of a problem. Now, if you can do a couple of things. One is you can turn off the symptoms and ignore the fact you have a problem and think you're well. However, whatever's wrong is still wrong, and down the road, whether you know it that it's there or not, it's going to be doing its job until finally one day you find you have a terrible, serious illness. And recently, I read a report of a researcher who spent years studying clinical records of patients. He did thousands of them. When he was all done, his basic conclusion was chronic illnesses have their origin 20 to 30 years ago. And people don't realize it. Every time a symptom comes up, they go get a drug. The drug suppresses the symptom. They feel better, and they think they're well. And you can do the same thing by throwing the body out of balance. If you push the pH way off to one side, you're going to be in big trouble. And so I keep hearing people say, and I keep looking for, okay, where's the research? Where's the research that says this? And they keep saying, got to alkalize because we get too much acid today. And I say, well, how do you know we get too much acid? Well, we just get too much acid. Everybody's body's too acid. And so I say, how do you know it is? Well, we measure the urine, or we measure the saliva. Well, first of all, that's not the whole body. The urine is the byproducts being thrown out, and I don't even have time to go into it today, but we'll do that. we're just considering here, having make a big decision. There's so much information that you need to know. We were trying to decide if we may continue this on into the next broadcast, and I think probably we may have to. But I want to do more about this pH thing. If there's anything that you need to be aware that it's never good to push the body off too far either way, because you throw things off balance. You can shut down symptoms, that's true, but the question is, are you healthier? And I don't believe that that's going to work. I've, in my own clinical practice, have told people sometimes you've got to make a change, and they don't do it. And guess what? When they finally are not well and they decide to do it and they get well, they say, well, I guess I have to agree with you. Sometimes people don't want to change their diet because they like certain foods. Sometimes they don't want to change it because of some ethical idea they have, like I want to be a vegetarian because I don't want to kill animals. That may be true. Other people are still going to kill the animals anyhow, regardless. But an O-type person is not going to do well without animal protein. And I don't believe it's just the amino acids. I think it's probably the nucleic acids and other factors that are part of why they need the meat. And me being an O, I know I can't do it. Anyhow, the pH. I've just got to mention real fast that the pH is important. That there's different compartments in the body that require very acid, and there's compartments that require somewhat alkaline. But there's none that I know of that require extreme alkaline. So I know if you pour a lot of alkalinity in your body, and I think I know I have. I've shown you before the BEV program out of Germany and France, that there's 4 quadrants that your body can be in, and this one, which is 1, 2, 3, has, unfortunately, 2 alkaline and not enough electrons, bottom line. Now, I just given you enough stuff to kind of whet your appetite, and we have more that we can go into this and carry it into the next program, and I think that's what we're going to have to do. You might want to get the book called The pH Miracle by a Dr. Robert O. Young and get some ideas what I'm talking about, and then we're going to go into that in more detail, because I'll be able to show you, this is by quote scientific research, that even within a cell you're going to see a pH range of one compartment requiring a 7+ pH and another compartment requiring a 5 pH to work properly, and that's just within a single cell. So it's not that simple when you start talking about the pH of the body and thinking by measuring urine and saliva you're talking something about the body pH. Okay, we're coming to an end of the broadcast. I got the cut your talk. So we're going to be going back, because there's a lot more that you need to know, and this is probably one of the most serious things that you could be looking into, because your diet is with you your whole life until you're dead. And if it's not doing you the best, it's going to impair your ability to function in this world. Don't forget to go to the forum and give us your comments, criticisms, and suggestions for what we might talk about. And you can click that from our webcast, which is mindyourhealthcast.com. Don't forget this broadcast, which can be clicked on from our website, or going to freeducast.com/mindyourhealthcast. I think I've given you all the information that I can load into your head for the moment. We're looking forward to seeing you next time, and we'll give you a lot more good information, but in the long run, you've got to make the decision what to do with it. Until next time, it was nice being with you again.